Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker. Abam Mambo is an attorney, gifted storyteller, podcast host, prize-winning writer, published poet, essayist, speaker, and is Microsoft's new regional legal director for workplace investigations for Asia. For over 12 years, Abam has advised Fortune 500 executives on workplace issues, corporate compliance, and inclusion and diversity. Her keynote touches about gender and ethnic inequality as we fight for a more level playing field and that no woman is left behind. Everyone, let's welcome Abam.
Hi everyone. Sisters are in fact doing it by themselves, but sisters means all of us. So I like starting every talk I give by telling a story. And mine begins something like this. Ladies are seen and not heard. What? Ladies are seen and not heard. That was the admonishment I got when I attended an all-girls Catholic boarding school between the ages of 10 and 14. So it wasn't just school. At home and with the extended family and the neighbors, I was also called Mami Tok Tok. Mami Tok Tok means in Pidgin English, a girl who talks too much. That girl was me. I asked a lot of questions. I was immensely curious. And I suppose adults didn't quite like my questions or perhaps didn't know the answers to my questions. So I am not unlike so many women around the world. White women, women of color, black women, African women. We are products of a society that would rather see us than hear us. And yet, here I am and here we are. I celebrate the women who spoke before me and those who will come afterwards. Why does this matter? This whole idea that when we hold the mic or we stand in front of a camera, we transgress the social order that says we're not supposed to be here. It matters because over the last several decades, we've held hands as a collective of women, as a sisterhood of women, to trample upon social orders and patriarchal systems that said we cannot own property. We're not allowed to go to school. We're not allowed to hold jobs. We cannot drive without a husband's permission. We cannot even love who we want without the government's approval. We've held hands. We've marched together. And time again, we've pushed back on that patriarchy. We've pushed back on that social order. And again, with our voices, the same voices that are not supposed to be heard, we've managed to make tremendous progress. Right? Yay! But that's not the end of the story. If it was, I'd walk off the stage, but then I'd be leaving 10 minutes on the clock. Why would I do that? The reality is, as I think about the gains that have been made by women in the fight against gender discrimination over the last 30, 40, 50 years, I am reminded by something that the iconic Gloria Steinem said about the feminist movement. She said this recently. Women of color have always been at the forefront of the feminist movement. But if that's the case, I wonder, how come as we've made gains and seen progress for women, we don't see so much gains for women of color? A case in point. As I was looking at data for the Fortune 500 companies, that is America's 500 largest companies, 38 of the leaders are women. 33 of those are white women. In fact, recently, a newer one was appointed, so that makes 34. Which means if you do simple math, only 3 are women of color. And of those 3 women of color, not one is black, and not one is Hispanic. A Hydrix and Struggle study on corporate memberships in the last year tells us a similar story. We've made tremendous strides when it comes to appointment of women on corporate boards. In fact, 44.4% of people appointed to boards in the last year were women. Yay, parity. We're getting somewhere. And yet, only 23.3% of those were people of color. Taken as a whole then, when we look at existing appointments and new appointments, we see that white women track at 18.8% of board appointments. Black women, 4.4%. All other women falling behind. To me, that doesn't sound too much like progress, does it? George Orwell, in his 1945 seminal book, Animal Farm, said these: all animals are equal, but some animals, my friends, are more equal than others. As I look at the numbers from Fortune magazine and across America and the world, I realize, could George Orwell be onto something? And if some of you are thinking this is a purely or uniquely American problem, I have some news for you. When I looked at the numbers for the global 500 companies, guess what I saw? The numbers are actually more abysmal than the numbers for the Fortune 500 companies. Of the 500 people leading the world's largest companies, only 13, a grand 13, are women. One less from last year. And when last year we had 2 women of color among the 13, or the 14 rather, an Indonesian and a Singaporean, in 2020, all 13 women leading the global 500 companies are white women. I know, this is an unpleasant topic to talk about. I might be actually viewed as transgressing the code of sisterhood, not airing a dirty laundry in public. But the reality is, we have for so long asked men to give us space, asked men to give us room. It is time for us to look in our own backyards and ask the questions. Are we being allies to our sisters who are getting left behind? The same sisters who've marched with us from the beginning to fight for equality, for equal pay, for elimination of sexual harassment in the workplace, to ensure that we have childcare for our children. We've marched together. Isn't it fair that we ask for equal rights for all women? Because when you think about it, who will actually attain gender parity or gender equality if only white women? In a numbers game, no, it doesn't quite work that way. So I come to you today in a bit of distress because this is a tough topic to talk about. And for those of you listening, it's probably tougher to listen to. But what I can assure you is that for women of color, it is the toughest thing. But this is our lived experience. And when I talk about these disparities, what exactly am I talking about? I think examples help. Here are some. We live in a world where, in A Tale of Two Princesses, when Kate Middleton crosses her legs, Kate is just crossing her legs. When Meghan Markle does it, she's transgressing the royal code. When Kate Middleton rubs her baby bump, she's celebrated as being all things maternal. When Meghan Markle does it, she can't keep her hands off her bump. She's so snobby. Why is that? And more importantly, as women, why aren't we asking those questions of the press? But it's more than that. When we look at the recent election of Joe Biden into the presidency of the United States, we see that his vice president-elect is Kamala Harris, a woman first, then Black and South Asian. Why is it that the way we talk about her and the way we celebrate her has been primarily as a Black woman and a South Asian woman first? As much as I can remember, the oldest form of discrimination is gender discrimination, which means as a collective of women, as a sisterhood, we should be celebrating the fact that a woman, regardless of her race or her ethnicity, has cracked the next highest ceiling in the world. Why aren't we celebrating that as a collective? We should be. The WTO recently is in the wake of appointing its most recent Director General. This is monumental. The final two candidates were women, and they've chosen who they want. The Trump administration continues to block that. And this point is personal for me on a level because the person we're looking to appoint is Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. My question to you is, when the French lawyer and leader, Christine Lagarde, raised her hand during the Dominique Strauss-Kahn sexual harassment scandal and said, I want to lead the International Monetary Fund, we supported her, we got behind her. The sisterhood came out because we wanted a woman to lead one of the biggest financial institutions in the world. My question is, where is the sisterhood supporting Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala? Why aren't we calling on Trump to get out of her way and let her get to work? We cannot be selective about who we choose to support if the mission is to put as many capable women in leadership positions as possible. But to bring this whole thing home, I want to tell you a quick short story. In the early weeks of the pandemic, a leader gathered her citizens around her. She mandated that every man, woman, and child wear masks, socially distance, stay at home. She shut down the borders, upsetting a lot of international superpowers. She said, my people first. As a result of her very aggressive approach, 10 months later, her country has seen a grand total of 600 reported cases and only 7 deaths. Impressive, right? Now, who do you think I'm talking about? If you think I'm talking about the empathetic, brilliant Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, you would be so wrong. Not because she's not immensely qualified, not because she's not talented, not because she has not been brilliant, but because there's another woman who has done a tremendous job of leading a country of 23.5 million people through the coronavirus in the last 10 months without once locking down the country or succumbing to a second wave. Why isn't she a household name like Jacinda? Why isn't the president of Taiwan, the first ever female president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, a household name in the very same way that Jacinda Ardern is? There is something wrong with our sisterhood if we're not upholding white women and women of color in the same way. That is the elephant in the room. That is a conversation that we women need to have in our sisterhood. If we want all the young girls to grow up to see a diverse palette of faces and cultures and ethnicities when we talk about female leadership. So as for equity, I think equity can work, but we cannot get to equity until we hold hands and accept that as long as we continue to experience sexism, primarily through the white woman's experience of sexism, we will continue to miss the intersectionality of race and sex in the experience of minority women and women of color. This is my fight. This is my commitment. In the sisterhood, what's yours?